Okay, release notes for version 4.7. We have a big one here, people. This is going to take a little while, but there's some good things in this release. So I'll just list the three bug fixes first, just to get it out of the way. So we've got a bug fix for site information, just under settings, site information. Just the value column here was displaying the field type rather than the actual value in that field. We can see that's been fixed. Also, with submitting a form that had a Boolean field type in it, the value that the system was spitting out was just on if it was ticked, rather than a true/false correct Boolean value. So that's fixed, and there was just an issue with the liquid counter tag when used in list views. When the new liquid rendering engine was switched on, that now works as well. Tested that. Okay, so first new beta item, beta feature we have. So if you look in your beta features section, you'll see customizable columns for module item view. Now just note this is only for Pro Plus plans, which is a bit of a bummer. I'm not sure why such a high plan restriction there, but that's how it is, I guess. But this is a really cool feature for customizing the columns in your custom modules. So, or any modules actually, I think. So let's say we go and look at my portfolio here. So by default, we have these column headings here that the system automatically provides. But if we go ahead and turn on the beta feature for this, customizing this, and I head back to that portfolio or any module, we can see it's looking a little different here. And when we hover over, we've got some little controls. We can just control the width. We can sort by all those headings. But more importantly, we can go to the settings, and you'll have a new option here called Table. And we now have full control over editing the order of these columns, what they are, the name of them. We could just call this date if we wanted to. Save that. We can add additional columns, so we can use any, let's just call this any data, and we can pull out any data field within this custom module, even our custom properties. So you've got some carousel image fields here, button name, so if we want to know the button URL, we want to show that in the table, we can do that. We can adjust the widths in here for both desktop and mobile views, or we could hide this column on mobile altogether. So some really cool features they've put into this, some good thinking. So save that. Now you'll see it didn't actually show here because the table is too wide for the browser window, but it's got a horizontal scroll on it. So you can see that there now, and you can rearrange them if you need to. And it automatically saves every change you make. And let's say I didn't want template in there as well, so we can delete a column. Okay, now we're going to head back to the list view, and we can see now we have my any data test one that I made, which just is showing the hash symbol because these are just dummy entries, but that would normally be like a URL. Got another test one that I put in earlier. And yeah, that's horizontal scrolling. So really cool feature just to customize on what data you can actually see from the list view, depending on your module requirements. Okay, so the text here just goes through all those options that I just went through. it works on both the list and tree view. So if you've got tree view options available, if you've got nested modules, it'll work there as well. And there's just a bit of information about the tree view layout here, which was actually confusing me a little bit. I'm not quite sure what this meant, but it's something to do with, like, if you've got duplicate properties. I think properties that might have the same name. So if you have nested modules and your parent module has a property, let's say an image field, and your nested module also has an image field, and you want both of those displaying in the table, in the list views, it's just sort of describing here the process on how it displays those. But I couldn't quite figure it out even with some testing, so I might have to read through that. But I don't think it's going to come up too much as an issue. And then also, along with this table list customization, from what it looks like, is a pagination change. So you can see here now we have, firstly, pagination is at the top as well as the bottom, which is good. And we've got a page number input field here, so you can jump straight to a page number by typing it in if you've got a lot of items. So by the look of it, the pagination changes are tied in with that beta feature, and probably, I'm assuming, comes along with that change if you activate that on a Pro Plus plan only. So I don't know if this pagination is going to flow through to other modules or other plans separately to the customization of the table, but it looks that way. So, and also just a note that it's also now included in the admin user roles. So if you're setting up any sort of restrictions to admin user roles when you create a new role, so it's in a few places. So we're looking for this can edit module item column setting. So I think it was in, so any of like the system modules, so blogs, you'll see it here now, can edit module item column settings. So that's giving the admin the ability to edit the table. And of course, any of your custom modules, so right down the bottom, portfolio, which we're looking in, should have that option as well, just here. So basically, any module that has that capability, there'll be the option to turn the editing of that off for different admin roles. Okay, and then we've got another item here for the module settings UI change. So basically, they're just changing the look on how that works. So let's say we're in custom module and you go to your settings. This is now a tab view at the top here. Before it was like a step 1, step 2, step 3 type layout. And there's some screenshots just showing the before and after there, which you can look at. So I think that's a bit cleaner. Then now we have a new component tag. There's actually a number of new component tags in this release. So this is the first new component tag, and it's a file system API. So it basically allows you to list out the files within a particular folder on your site. So let's see if we can just quickly demo that. I think I have a test page set up. So folder list. So basically I've just set up a page, and we can see here this is the component tag. So basically it has a resource type of file system. There's a folder parameter, which you just put in the path to the folder you want to list. And this component doesn't have like any list view or layout that you can adjust. So it's purely just a data thing. So you need to pass it into a collection variable. So in this case, I've just called it pics, assuming there's going to be images in this one. and then it has a type of API. And just for reference, this is also included in the components toolbox. So under liquid data, there's one called file system. So I'm hoping this liquid data is the start of many more API-driven components that might come into here. So that's a good hint to the future. So then all I'm doing now, just so we can see that data, just rendering the pics variable into some pre-tags so we can look at that. So if I hit preview, so you can see here it spits out some JSON that you can obviously access with Liquid via the items. So you can do a for loop on that items and pull out the URL value, and that will give you a list of all the files, not just images. So if you're doing a folder that has text files or CSS files or whatever, I'm pretty sure they'll all be listed as well. It doesn't list files or subfolders within a folder that you're looking at, which is a bit of a bummer. I was hoping that it would list folders as well so you could drill down into them, but just got files at the moment, so that's pretty handy feature. What else have we got with that? Yeah, so it's just saying that we've got just the URL is the only context within the items, and that it's in the component toolbox in the liquid data file system. Yeah, and just with that toolbox, I've just made a little improvement there, I think, with when you're selecting the folder that you want. So you've got a tree view here for the folders, but what you can do, so if you, let's say we click images, it updates the code that you can copy here. But as a bit of a shortcut, if you click on the icon here, it not only updates the code snippet, but copies it straight away, so you can just come and paste that straight in. So just a little bit of a shortcut there. And also there's a plan restriction for this as well to the Pro plan. So obviously that's probably accessing a bit more resources and probably only going to use this feature for higher level plans perhaps. So that's probably a well justified restriction there. Okay, the next one we have the analytics dashboard settings. So basically they're removing the requirement for a tracking ID from the Google tracking ID. So when you're setting up your analytics, I'll just go to that page. So you're asked for a tracking ID, view ID, and the key file. So now it's saying you're only required to get the analytics dashboard working. We only need the view ID and the key file. The tracking IDs actually only to render the Google tracking code on the site. So by not having this as a requirement, it allows you to put your own tracking code in, your own configuration for the Google tracking code, rather than having the system auto-generate that for you. So obviously if you need to do customizations to that Google tag snippet, then you can leave out the tracking ID here and insert your code manually. Okay, so the next new component tag we have, there's a series of them here. By the release notes, it's all geared around the blog, but this actually does work for all other modules as well. So basically it's a module component tag for rendering the tags of a particular module. So we'll demo that here just to get our heads around what that's doing. So I have a page I've just set up called tags. So you'll see here I've got the component tag configured. So if I walk through the notes here, okay, so it's showing us the pattern of this component, like how it's sort of made up, and then listing all the parameters that we can configure this component for. So very similar to all your other components. it asks for a module, so that's the actual module name or the module ID of whichever module you want to pull the tags from. So let's say we're talking about the blog. So in this case, we would put the module would be blog posts, because it's the actual blog posts that have the tags assigned to them. Or you could put in the actual the blog post ID, the system ID, but most of the time we do it by name. And you optionally have a parent item ID. So if you have multiple blogs set up, you can actually specify which blog you want to pull those tags from. And then we have the object. So like we do with all module tags, it's either item or collection. So just note here that it's actually collection by default, which is sort of the reverse to all the other modules, or most of the other modules. Because this is just sort of like a system component tag, it doesn't have any layouts or any layouts for us to configure. So by default, it's a collection that we just loop through. We have limit, just like we do in other modules, to limit the number of tags that we're going to call out. Collection variable, so that we can create a custom liquid variable for that. Again, not required. We have a layout option, just like we do with other components as well. So you can put a path, even though this module itself doesn't have layouts in the admin, but here we can just specify a path to any layout file that we create, so like an include basically. And there's just a note that if it's an empty string, it won't render anything. If the parameter is not specified at all, then it will render a virtual layout, which we'll talk about in a minute. So there's like a built-in layout that it will use if nothing else is specified. And then we have sort by and sort order, so that's like we do with other modules as well. And in this case, we can sort by name or items count. And the items count, we'll see in a minute what that looks like. So I might just demo this page. So I've just got one set up for the blogs on this particular test site. And I'm just going to render out the JSON for that. So again, we can see we've got our items and then just the list. I've got 4 tags. You can see the names of each one here. And we can see there's a URL generated. So there's a special system URL that will obviously, once you're in the context of the module that you're pulling these tags from, so in this case a blog, when you're in the context of that blog layout, and you access this URL that it's giving us, it will list all the blog posts with that tag. And there's an items count, so this actually tells us how many posts in this blog, or all blogs, are using that tag, so it's really helpful. So you can imagine if you're doing a blog layout and you've got your tags down the side, you can sort of put how many posts there are in your site using that tag. So some good information there. Okay. So we talked about there's like a default virtual layout for this. So here I'm just rendering out the raw liquid data, the JSON data, but as we mentioned before, there's this virtual layout. So so basically it says here for layout, if it's an empty string, so if I have layout and I leave that value empty, it's basically suppressing the layout, so nothing will render. But if you don't have it at all, it's supposed to render the virtual layout. Now you'll notice that in my test here, I didn't have it, but I was still not rendering that virtual layout. And that's because I had a collection variable as well. So if you want to render the default layout, you have you can't have a collection variable on that either. So if I take that off, resave, and refresh this page, we'll see we've got an actual list of tags. So this is the virtual layout, and they give a sort of example on what the structure of that is here. So in the release notes here, it just also goes into how the URL is constructed with the special property parameters for the URL. So you can have a sort of read through that, see how that's working. It'll actually be helpful too to sort of understand how that's working, because you could use these URLs in other cases as well, not just specifically with this component tag, perhaps. And just another note, it's saying that the virtual layout returns items that have item counts greater than 0, which I haven't found to be the case with tags. With the other components that we're going to look at in a minute, it's right, that is the case, but with this one it still spits out tags even if they have no count assigned to them. But if you're rendering your own list, you can easily do a liquid filter to block out those. But that may just be a little bug or something they've missed there. So the next component tag that we have, the new component tag, is basically the same thing but for categories instead of tags. So it pretty much works exactly the same way. I've got a demo for that as well. So I've got a page called cats. Okay, so we can see very similar structure to the component tag. It goes through all the items here. So pretty much all the same, I think. So in this particular example, I've put the parent ID in, and I've hard-coded in an ID of a particular blog that's on this site. So that will just retrieve categories that are in use from that particular blog. So you can see here we've got 3 categories showing up. And so just as a demo, how this works on other modules, not just for blog, although that's probably where it's going to be used the most. Let's say I've got a custom module here. Let's say we look at services here. Actually, I know Portfolio is using categories, so I might try that. So I'm going to change, instead of the module being blog post, I'm going to change it to the name of our custom module, so Portfolio. I'm going to get rid of the parent IDs because there is no grouping in this case. We'll leave the variable called cats. So just save that. That's all I've changed is the module name. Go back to our page and refresh. And you can see we've got a different set of categories being listed here for that module only. So even though categories are global throughout the whole site, because we're specifying the module that we want to pull them from, we're just getting the ones that are in use there. And you can see the URL again is generated. It's slightly different because it has the different module ID in it. Okay, so that's all the same. And again, there's the whole virtual layout that it will render if nothing else is provided. Okay, and then the next component we have, another new component, is for module archive. So again, this is more in the context of a blog where you might want to have an archive for blog posts by the month of a certain year or something like that. So we now have that module to use in a blog. And demo that one just quickly. So you can see, again, it's very similar. The component type is module archive. You just change Again, it's a collection by default because we don't have layouts that we're going to list the actual items out of. And then again, for the module, you just set whichever module that you want to list from. So obviously we think of a blog in this context, but again, it works for other modules because it's just working on the release and expiry dates. So it's just going to sort them into years and months based on their release and expiry date. So a really cool feature. You can use it for any module. And then we have the only different parameter we have in this particular one. Where is it? Oh, here it is, not in bold. I missed it, that's why I missed it. So number of months. So think of this as just a replacement of the limit. So up here, we can see we've got limit, which basically just limits the number of whatever you're calling. In the case of the archive, they've just called it, where is it? Number of month. It probably should be number of months. But basically it's just a limit, but we're doing it in months. So if you want to just list the last 12 months of archives, then you put a 12. You can see in this case I'm putting 19, and let's have a look what that renders. Okay, so you can see, so instead of like an items object, we have a years object. So if you're going to be looping through this, you'll do like this.years rather than this.items. So it'll only list months and years that have something at that date. So it's not just going to list out every single year and every single month. So you can see that we've got in the system items for the year 2018, and then it will do a sub set of items for the months, and we can see that we've got August and April items, and it will give you a list of all their URLs, or rather a URL in order to retrieve all items that have that that month. And again, we have the items count to show you how many items have this month, basically, this month and year combination. Okay, so again, the release notes just go into the pattern of that, how that's all structured, so you can get a good feel on how that all works, which we've just gone through. So it's sort of showing you some examples with the parent ID in place and without the parent ID in place, just to try and get your head around the differences with doing that, and just so you can make sure you're calling items from the right modules and limiting them to the right modules if you want to, or you can pull them more from a more broad sense, like from all blogs or from a specific blog, basically. And again, just shows you the layout for that virtual layout if you don't specify any other layout. Okay, so now sort of in relation to all this new sort of URL parameters that it's using here as a way of calling specific items, we now have this additional search scope, or what they call search scope. So it's a new component property, I guess, or parameter. So where we might have parameters in our component tag here, like the module that we want to call, parent ID that we want to use, number of months, we have an additional one for search scope. So for example, I could put that into a module like this. So we've got search scope, and then it wants a value. So what is this exactly? So it's a way of searching or filtering a component with a JSON string. So it's a bit like module data in BC. Probably not quite there to that extent yet, but it's kind of getting there. So so it says here pass content of search scope as JSON. If any exception occurs while passing, it will just ignore the parameter. So if there's an error in the value that you put here, it will just ignore it. So it's going to retrieve objects just like the get parameters from a search. So if you look at with the site search or the custom module search particularly, if you run a search, it will put into the URL parameter all these property parameters. So that's how it knows what to search for. Like, it will put the keyword and the release date or whatever you've configured to search with. So instead of doing that, you can basically take those parameters and put them into this search scope here, and it will basically do the same thing, just without running a search and without doing it through the URL. So it's kind of a different approach to searching with those properties. And there's a bunch of examples here on how that might look. Also, just here it goes into note here, because there's now like these two ways to do it. There could be conflicts, like if you're running a search but then you have a component tag that has a different set of parameters for that same module that you're searching on, there could be conflicts there. So there's a note here about like the priority that it will use. I'm not quite sure I understand what that means exactly, but I think what it's saying here is that if there's search parameters in the URL, then they will take preference over your search scope in the module. Either that or vice versa, but one or the other takes preference. I think it would be a rare case to run into that. So this is an example of that. So let's say this URL was generated by a search. You did a search on the blog and you got all these properties in the URL. It would be the equivalent, and this is the component tag you would have with the is search results true. So it would be looking for all those properties in the URL. But instead of that, so option 2 here, you could have a blank URL, just the blog, and your component tag is configured with all of those properties. So we can see it here. So search scope, and then we have a JSON list or JSON object of all those properties. So let's say I could take this and paste it in here. So you can see here now I've got this big long messy JSON object in here defining how I want to render out the items in this module. So we can see we've got a release date minimum, so I want to give any items from this date to a release date maximum, so to this date, so a date range, we're setting a date range. And then parent ID, we want to call a specific parent ID, so if you may already be doing that. See, I'm already doing that here in the module, so you probably wouldn't need that in the search string, but you can do either. And then we're looking for some tags. So we're looking for items that have both of those tags. And additionally, like we had with search, if you're using pagination and you go to page 2 or page 3, that would actually go into the URL as well. So you can equally do that in this search scope, which I don't really think you would probably ever want to do this method, because I don't know why you would want to progress to a secondary page. I mean, you'd have to be using pagination in combination with that. So, but nonetheless, the option's there. So it's quite powerful. I think we've got quite a lot of power in this now, and I've tested it too. You can use Liquid within this JSON object as well, so you can dynamically construct this search scope. And the last example here is just a good example to have, because obviously your component tag is going to get really messy, looks really daunting. So just one way to clean that up a little bit is to capture that JSON object, capture it in a liquid capture. So you can specify your own variable name and then just plug that variable name into your component tag. So this is the component tag. Under search scope, we just put in that liquid variable. So it just cleans up your module tag a little bit and separates those two items. So you can have your complex JSON object here, and then your component, your nice clean component down here. Okay, so that was a lot to go through. I went through pretty quick. Hopefully it all made sense. But because a lot of these new component tags relate to the blog, I will definitely be updating the demo site because it's currently got, I might just bring that up actually. Bring that over here. So on the docs demo site, we have a sort of like a full functional blog, which has all the listings of categories, tags, and the month. Now this was done the old way by looping through all the items and seeing what was what. But now we can do that straight with component tags, so a lot cleaner, should be a lot more powerful. So I will be updating this with the new method, which will include all those components we just went through. And I'll also probably introduce a blog search, which I think is available but not really documented or in the component manager at all. So, but now there will be a way to search the blog in a better way. So I might add a search function in here as well. So that will be coming soon. Get that up to date. And that pretty much covers it. So thanks for listening.